Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Malcolm Bates. I'm the Director of Emergency Health Services Branch of the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. Thank you for this second opportunity to address the Standing Committee on Public Accounts with respect to the Auditor General's report into the Ornge Air Ambulance Service. Today, I'll focus my remarks on ministry investigations into air ambulance and related services, that being Ornge. At the outset, I think it would be helpful for me to outline the ministry's complaints process. The services provided by land and air ambulance operators generate a number of complaints or concerns each year. For land ambulance operators, most are handled directly by the ambulance services themselves. Those are primarily municipalities, of course. All complaints regarding Ornge now must be reported to the ministry. The branch receives complaints or inquiries from a variety of internal and external sources, through the ministry itself, municipal representatives, managers or directors of emergency medical services, dispatch centers, Ornge, as well as through patients, their families, the local regional coroner, police services, and legal representatives. Complaints are conveyed to the Ministry's Emergency Health Services Branch, which conducts an investigation in each complaint and reports the findings to the complaint as well as to the relevant ambulance service. The branch currently has a number of ongoing investigations, approximately 50 related to incidents concerning Ornge's response to various patients requiring air ambulance service across the province. Now, each investigation typically takes many weeks to complete. These investigations reflect a variety of concerns. They range from the standard of medical care to Ornge's responsiveness to requests for air ambulance service. As I'm sure you can appreciate, we should be cautious about discussing any specifics related to individual patients whose privacy and personal health information is protected under Ontario's Personal Health Information Protection Act. I should point out that the Ministry's process allows for some of these complaints to be forwarded to the service operator to conduct its own internal investigation and then report to the complainant. As of mid-May 2012, the branch's investigation services had not, however, redirected any complaint to Ornge for its own internal investigation. Any internal investigations that had been undertaken by Ornge would have been in response to complaints it received directly. In terms of the process in relation to the Office of a Chief Coroner, Section 10 of the Coroners Act requires that the coroner be notified if an investigation involves a deceased patient whose manner of death meets legislated criteria. The decision whether to conduct an inquest rests with the coroner's office. So that's the process of investigations. The purpose of an investigation is to determine whether there have been any contraventions of the Ambulance Act, its regulations, or the standards made under that Act. To work with the operator of the ambulance service in question to identify issues which require remediation, and to follow up with the operator with respect to the actions that have been taken to avoid future occurrences of identified problems. It's important to note that the branch does not conduct investigations into matters covered by any other provincial or federal legislation, nor does it determine the cause of injury or death, nor does it delve into the actions of other agencies such as fire and police. Thank you again for this opportunity to outline the Ministry's complaint process with respect to air and land services, and now I invite your questions.
The NDP will go first this time. Who would like to go first? Mr. Singh?
Yes, thank you.
You have 20 minutes.
Thank you so much. Mr. Bates, we heard some testimony today from an individual who also worked at emergency. You're nodding your head and you know who I'm talking about.
I do.
If you could just explain to me the process underneath the original Ontario Air Ambulance in terms of what the ministry did for oversight and how that differed with the development of Ornge.
All right. Well, prior to Ornge assuming responsibility, and I think I pointed this out the last time we were at this particular session, the ministry basically had full responsibility for the provision of air ambulance services in the province. And that was accomplished in a number of ways, one of which is it had a small administrative group called the Air Ambulance Unit. It had contracts with two dedicated carriers, Canadian Helicopters and Voyageur Airlines. It utilized standing agreement operators, primarily in the north, to provide service whenever necessary. The dispatch center, communication center, was operated directly by the ministry. And so we had fairly good, if not excellent, information over what was taking place in the system. Now, we also had investigative activities that we conducted. We had, I believe, 4 investigators and a manager that conducted investigations whenever necessary. Service visits were conducted as opportunities permitted throughout the province. And at various times there was, I think Fred mentioned this morning, Mr. Brown was manager of Air Ambulance, so he had a very good background. We also utilized the Ministry of Natural Resources from an aviation perspective.
And Mr. Bates, and sure, I'm sure there's a number of other things. And now, if you could just contrast that when the Ontario Air Ambulance transitioned into what we now call Ornge.
Yes.
What was the ministry's oversight process then?
Well, let me go back, if you will, a few years, okay, to about 2000, I believe it was. And at that time, the regulation under the Ambulance Act included substantial requirements for the air ambulance services, for air operators. And at that time, the Red Tape Commission decided that it would, in fact, look into the standards provided under the regulation. And significant and substantial changes occurred to the regulation at that particular point in time as a result.
That was in 2000?
2000,
So
yes.
let me just pause you there. We can come back to that in a minute,
Okay.
Mr. Bates. If you can just tell me about Ornge, though. When Ornge came into effect, what was the ministry doing in terms of oversight? You just had, listed a number of things that you did under
Yes.
the air
Right.
ambulance. But when
Okay.
Ornge came into effect, what was different there?
Well,
Did the ministry do regular
yes.
visits?
I was going to say that what changed as a result of the Red Tape Commission is it went from a licensing situation to a certification, periodic certification situation. And I think I explained certification at some length previously, sort of thing. So operators are certified according to the air ambulance certification standards
we're
every
familiar with
3
the
years.
Right.
Pardon me?
No, we're familiar with the certification. So what did the ministry do in terms of overseeing Ornge?
That is part of the certification, is part of the oversight, a
Okay.
very important part of the oversight, okay? The air ambulance unit was disbanded when Ornge assumed responsibility for it, because as you recall, the provincial auditor general said that the performance agreement gave Ornge responsibility for making all key operating decisions, including how to provide service, how many and what type of aircraft, how to establish and evaluate medical oversight, when to dispatch ambulances, and
We can
which
read that, I'm
paramedics.
sure. Yeah.
So oversight was changed radically. We did investigations of complaints, we did certification, and of course we reviewed financial information provided to us.
Okay. And so how often, in terms of going from being very heavily involved, obviously it was directly under the ministry, so you would attend and visit the different air ambulance, the different air bases across the province. What happened in terms of the actual, were there regular visits at Ornge facilities or at air bases? Was there a regular inspection of the aircraft that were being used? Were those type of steps taken?
That's what I was endeavoring to say. Certification came in. It changed things. It became a 3-year periodic review of what was taken, including exactly what you just mentioned.
So those things wouldn't happen on a regular basis, they would happen every 3 years?
Yes, other than a few unannounced inspections and certainly a number of investigations that took place in which we reviewed all aspects according to whatever transpired under that investigation.
And how many unannounced visits did you have, or that you conducted? Mr. Rossi indicated at least one time that he remembered seeing you come
No,
up.
I think, sir, you're confusing. An unannounced visit, all right, inspection, is when a member of Emergency Health Services certification team or a manager visits an air ambulance base, if you will, sort of thing, under Ornge's jurisdiction, all right, to determine. What Mr. Rusk was referring to, and I paid very special attention to Mr. Rusk this morning, was, in fact, the normal sort of exchange of visits and discussions between the administration, the executives of Ornge, and emergency health services.
Thank you for clarifying that. I actually was confused. But then, how many times were there these random inspections? How many times were they unannounced inspections? How many times did that happen?
It's not possible to do a lot of unannounced inspections because of the constraints, all right? And let me just tell you what happens.
But it's okay. I don't. Well, just wondering how many times can you say roughly, maybe in a month or in a year, they would have
We've done
occurred?
10 in the last year.
10 in the last year,
Yeah.
and then how many in the years before that?
Very few. In fact, they were not, recorded prior to that.
They're not recorded. So let's from let's say 2004 to 5, would there be a?
Or I can tell you exactly how many investigations there were. There were 105 orange investigations from the year 2007 to 2011.
Not complaint investigation. I'm
Yes.
talking about the
They-
unannounced visits. You said there was 10 of them in the last year.
Yes.
How many of them were there from 2004 to 2005?
There were very few. They
Probably-
were not recorded. I do not have the number.
Okay, so very few. Would we say would it be possible that there were none in that
It's
one year?
possible, but...
And 05 to 06,
The
were
fact
there?
of the matter is that a number of us would go to Orange, we'd go to the dispatch center, for instance. You could say that was an unannounced visit, sort of thing, because they didn't know we were coming, but...
But it wasn't an exhaustive.
No, no,
So 05 to 06, would there have been any? Do you recall?
I don't believe so.
Okay, and then 07 to 08, would there have been any?
As I say, I don't know. I don't
Okay.
think so. I don't believe so. We
Okay.
didn't record it.
That's fine.
It was
And then-
it was a
And I'm just pinpointing the 10 were, so it wasn't in 09 to 10 either. It would have been in the year of 2011.
yeah. I mean, it's basically as a result of the good work of the Auditor General pointing out the need for unannounced visits.
Okay. So before the Auditor General pointing out, unannounced visits essentially weren't really done,
They were conducted in the land services primarily.
and not in the air.
Not
ambulance
in the
service.
air.
Okay.
Why would that be? Why is it that we continue to do an announced visit in the land ambulance? I'm guessing because they add value if you kept on doing them, but the same was not done for air.
Well, as I said, it was a result of what the Auditor General pointed out to us. We started with the land services because at the time we felt those were more important and most, because they are the predominant number of services that we have, sort of thing. And so we started with those in about 2008, starting unannounced inspections in that particular area, and worked from there to unannounced in air. And the problem with air, as I was going to point out to you, land services are easy to do unannounced inspections on because you go to a base, normally there's an ambulance in the base, all right? You go to an air base, all right, but chances are good because there's usually only one aircraft at that particular base. It could be gone, sort of thing. You've now wasted your resources, the funding to go there, the cost to go there, to do an unannounced inspection. So I directed we would do unannounced inspections, all right, only when individual from the certification unit or investigation unit happen to be in the area. We don't have resources significantly enough to do a lot of these. We have to be very economical as to how we do these.
So that was a conscious decision?
Absolutely.
And when did you make that decision that you would only go to an announced visit to the air ambulance when...
In 2011.
Okay, but...
That we would do that. Before that, it wasn't productive, if you want to call it that, to do that because the aircraft are out, the paramedics are out, and to be frank, we had no indication that there was any difficulty. Every indication we had was that the air ambulance service was, in fact, working efficiently.
Just to clarify, Mr. Bates, in 2011, when you did do the 10 investigations, nothing significant changed in terms of the funding, in terms of the availability of resources in 2011. It was the same as before, right?
It was the same as before.
Okay, so the same way you were able to do 10 in the year 2011,
Yes.
you could have done those.
2011-12, sorry.
So 2011 to 2012,
That's right.
you could have done those any prior year as well.
We could have.
Okay. Just wanted to switch gears a bit and ask you about Mr. Apps or Don Guy. Have you had any meetings or any calls with either of them?
Mr.
Just to,
Sorry.
we'll go to his question in 1 minute.
Sure.
So I just like, you made a conscious decision, you felt that everything was going good at Orange, therefore you wouldn't use resources to do an announced visit till after the good work of our auditor
That's
who
right.
pointed the way,
Yes.
and then you started doing them. I want you to look back and think, if you had been doing those, do you figure you would have picked up anything?
I don't think we would have picked up very much. I'll tell you why, because we were doing investigation reports on, and whenever there was a problem that came to our attention, the investigators would in fact conduct the investigation and bring that forward.
Since 2011, that you have done 10 unannounced visit, what have you worked on?
What have we worked on, or what has changed?
Well, let's start with, so you've done 10.
Yes.
I'm guessing if you kept going back, it's because you had, the auditor didn't tell you go there every month. The auditor just told you to, this is one tool that you should be considering. And the fact that you took it from 0 to 10 in 1 year, well, it's my assumption that you kept on going because there was a reason to go.
No, there was a reason, of course, but the reason was that the Auditor General recommended that we do that, and we follow what the Auditor General recommends to us very closely.
So why 10 in a year, why not 3?
Well, it's only because if someone happened to be in the area, I ask that we conduct these unannounced inspections as part of a continuing process of unannounced inspections with land as a result of what the Auditor General recommended. So, in fact, that's what we did. As part of it, we would go forward, and when, in fact, someone was in the area, they would conduct. For instance, my senior manager of operations was in Sudbury a month ago. I said, please do an unannounced inspection at the Sudbury base, and that was done.
And did anything come of those 10 that you have done in the last 2011, 2012?
Well, I think that part of it, and I believe that this was mentioned in the newspaper, there was one particular one that revealed that there was no staffing at the London air ambulance base. There was one in particular at Timmins that showed there was down staffing. The rest of them basically said that the staff were in place and when in fact the equipment was there and the equipment was clean.
And do you have like a format that you follow for
We
those
do.
announcements? And when was that format developed?
It was developed in 2008 for the land services and carried over for the air. They're basically the same, similar format, because you're looking at, is the vehicle, whether it be air or land, clean? Is the equipment there? Is the staff there? Is the base secure? A number of things like that.
And so the tool to do this was developed to do the land ambulance.
Yes.
It started using it in 2008.
That's right.
And then you started using that same tool in 2011.
That's right.
And so far, out of the 10 that you have done, 2 have brought back issues.
That's right.
Mainly staffing issues.
Exactly.
And the other 8 brought back nothing?
Well, it's not nothing. They indicated that, in fact, the staff was there that was required, if indeed the helicopter was there. If the helicopter or the fixed wing was out of base, then they simply determined that and said the aircraft was gone. We couldn't do the type of analysis that we normally like to do.
Okay, and out of the 10, would you know how many times the investigated report came back to, we couldn't, they were not there?
I know that when my manager went to Sudbury, that was the case, but I don't know of the other ones.
Okay. So 1 out of the 10, they were not there, the other 9, they were there? and
No,
2
I
of
can't
them-
say that.
Oh, no, you just know for a fact that 1, they were not there?
Yes, but I assume that in other instances, the same was the case.
So I just ask you, if we had been doing those, do you figure it would have brought something forward? You said you don't think so, but we've done 10 now, and on 2 of those 10, there were staffing issue. Wouldn't it be reasonable to think that you would have picked up staffing issues had you started doing them in 2008 or any time before?
from time to time, I suppose that could happen, but the fact of the matter is, we watched what was happening in their ambulance through the investigation side of things, and we saw no indication prior to 2011 that there was staffing issues.
So you had no idea that there could have been staffing issues? You had no idea that there could have been any issues going on?
Normally when something like that happens and the aircraft can't respond, something takes place in the sense of it's normally a complaint from somewhere, all right, to let us know.
So this sense of security came from, if something goes wrong, somebody will complain, therefore we will know. There was no complaint coming forward, so you felt pretty secure that things were doing good?
Well, and you know, we looked at the number of investigations versus the number of calls. The trend was not out of line, as I said. We were not getting a number of complaints about what Ornge was performing. We were assured on numerous occasions by Ornge that they were staffing properly. I have documentation that from the chairperson, for instance, that they're totally staffing according to what they're supposed to be staffing.
But we've heard from other witnesses that complaints did go to you. I will take Jacob Blum. He came and said that he had weekly meetings with the ministry when he decided to leave Ornge, that he was distressed about what was going on, that he went to the ministry and complained. So if you base your assessment that all is good because there's no complaint, then there's something that doesn't work, because a number of witnesses has come to us to say that they went to the ministry and they did put in complaints about Ornge. How do you? It doesn't work for me here.
Well, I think number one, you have to look at the time element. All right. The complaints that started coming in were in 2011, primarily, right? Jacob Bloom left in July of 2008, and with respect to his contention that he met weekly with us, he certainly was not in operations in any case. Jacob had nothing to do with operations. And his contention that he met with us every week, he certainly didn't meet with myself, all right, because I did not meet with Jacob more than once or twice over the period of time that he was with Ornge. He met with, and I went back after I heard that testimony and spoke to Dennis Brown, who was our manager at that particular time, who was in charge of all contact with Ornge other than financial, and he indicated that yes, he met with Jacob several times a week when the performance agreement was being negotiated. He met with him from time to time when the transfer of staff was taking place, and thereafter he met with him maybe once a month. So as far as what Jacob said goes, I think I have to take exception to that.
So are you telling us that you never heard any complaints from Ornge?
From Ornge itself?
From what was going on at Ornge? Nobody ever went to the ministry to say, listen, I have problems with what's going on at Ornge?
I'm saying to you in 2011, all right?
When in 2011?
July of 2011. We
and
received,
who was that?
I don't know. It was an anonymous letter.
So,
Okay, and you've used your 20 minutes.
okay.
So we'll move on to the government. Ms. Sanders?
Yes, thank you very much, and good afternoon again, Mr. Bates. Let's just carry on with the discussion that you were just having with Ms. Jelena about the losing my voice already. The frequency of meetings between the ministry and between Ornge. Mm-hmm. Because we've had a number of witnesses who've testified that Ornge met regularly. Ornge met, you just cited Mr. Bloom, and weekly, some say quarterly, some say regularly, but the comment has been that the ministry was kept fully informed about everything that was going on at Ornge, and that included being fully informed about what was happening at the for-profits. do you generally accept that testimony, or from your point of view, how frequent were the meetings and how fully were you informed?
Well, it's true that we met with Orange fairly frequently because it's required under the Transfer Payment Accountability Directive. That's a necessity for us to meet with our stakeholders. So certainly we met with Orange, and we developed quarterly meetings after an audit report that was conducted called the Myers-Norris-Penny audit. They recommended quarterly meetings, so we set up formal quarterly meetings with Orange in 2009. There was a number of informal meetings, if you will, primarily through Dennis Brown at that particular point in time. Now, they kept us informed about a number of things, okay? They kept us informed about what they were planning on doing in the future. They certainly did. I mean, we knew that from 2003 they were interested in revenue generation. That was part of their plan in 2003. They kept us informed through the various requirements on their performance agreement, and they provided a 5-year plan to us. They told us again that I think it was in 2008 that they told us that they were intending to purchase aircraft. They told us that they were becoming more interested in generating revenue through various means and methodologies. They did not tell us at that time about the complex group of companies that they were going to set up. Did they tell us things like MBAs and purchasing waffles in Belgium and Brussels? No, they didn't tell us that. Did they tell us about $1 million salaries? No, they didn't tell us about that. A number of things they did not tell us. Did they tell us about the interior of the aircraft having problems? No, they didn't tell us about that. So there are a number of things that they neglected to tell us. They changed staff in finance, for instance, very regularly, so we had great difficulty in getting information out of them. The same as the Auditor General had difficulty in getting information. We had difficulty over the years getting information from Orange about the financial side of things. So, yes, there were meetings, and some of them were formal. There were some informal conversations and dialogues, and that's valid.
Okay. So generally then, I guess as you look back, what were your oversight possibilities at that point, and where were there gaps? Understanding that hindsight is wonderful, but as you think back about what you were told and what you weren't told, what were the big missing bits, and how did your existing accountability powers allow you or not allow you to address that?
Well, as I indicated earlier, with respect to changes to the regulation, and as a result of the red tape efforts, there was a major change in the regulation that, in fact, I felt, and if you'll allow me to read it to you, is that permissible?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you to explain that because
Okay,
you
well,
referenced that, so I think it would be helpful for us to know the difference between licensing requirements and certification requirements.
Well, if I'll start with what was deleted from the regulation in I believe 2000, in that particular area. Okay. Here are some of the aspects where an applicable enterprise receives funds from the province of Ontario for the purposes of the enterprise. It shall use such funds only for such purposes.
So this is the old licensing
okay.
requirement?
Well, no, sorry, this is a financial requirement I'm giving you right now, okay?
Okay, but this was prior to the Red Tape Commission interviewing?
That's right.
Okay.
This is what was in effect in 1997, the Regulation 501 in 1997. Okay. It goes on to say, where the province of Ontario provides funds to an applicable enterprise or to an air ambulance service and directs that such funds shall be used for a particular purpose, the person who operates the enterprise or service shall use such funds only for the purpose so specified.
And that got deleted?
That got deleted.
Wow.
The next one is, where the province of Ontario provides equipment, supplies, or other tangible property to an applicable enterprise or to an air ambulance service, the person who operates the enterprise or service shall use such property only for purposes directly related to the enterprise or service, unless a director has approved some other disposition of the property.
And you would have been the director?
Well, not in 1997.
Well, okay, sorry. The person who occupied your position.
That's right.
Okay.
There's another one which...
So if I can just
Yeah.
understand the implication of that, when we had then Ornge eventually going out and purchasing aircraft, this business of what appears to be purchasing surplus aircraft for the purpose of international revenue, you, under the old reg, would have had the power to veto that, but you lost that power.
I believe that. I mean, it would require legal interpretation, but from my perspective, I think you're right. The next one that was deleted was, where funds provided by the province of Ontario are used by an applicable enterprise or an air ambulance service to acquire equipment, supplies, or any other property, the person who operates the enterprise or service shall use the acquired property only for purposes directly related to the enterprise or service, unless a director has approved some other disposition of the property. I think those are very important parts of the regulation that were deleted.
So those were all deleted about 2000.
That's
right. So prior to that, the regulation would have given you much more power to intervene in what was happening.
Precisely. And if I could quote from Mr. Frank Sheehan, the chairman of the commission, Mr. Sheehan said, "The commission recognizes the need to set provincial standards to protect public health safety. We are not questioning the need for standards. We're simply questioning the need to manage the process in such a detailed fashion." Now, I think that's very important, too, because that's what required the regulation to be changed.
But it seems to me from what I am hearing that even if the intent was not to be overly prescriptive, that the practical implication was that you lost a lot of authority to make sure that provincial assets and provincial funds were being appropriately deployed.
That is my belief.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Now, if we can follow along then, were there any other things that were deleted by the Red Tape Commission?
The licensing, as I say, was a constant, if you will.
Okay.
It had to be a license to operate an air ambulance service. That was changed to a periodic certification process.
And in going from licensing to certification, was there a different level of rigor involved in licensing versus certification?
I'm not sure I could say that, okay, but I think as far as the legal aspects of it goes, I think it's important to recognize that it went from a consistent full-time sort of situation to a periodic situation.
How often was the licensing?
The licensing was constant, in the sense of they possessed a license, and unless it was revoked, they carried on.
But whereas so what, am I interpreting you correctly, because I don't want to misunderstand then, is that if somebody had a license and abused it,
yes,
you would have had the authority to immediately revoke it.
Yes.
If somebody had certification, it wasn't till you recertified 3 years later that you had any opportunity to step in.
And I think the word opportunity is a good word in the sense of when it's in regulation, you have an opportunity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's very helpful because I don't think anybody's really explained that to us before. Now, a few of the other comments that you made a few minutes ago around processes here. I take it that for the most part that the rules that you're talking about here apply essentially to both land ambulances and air ambulances. So the inspection rules are the same rules. You mentioned that you started doing unannounced inspections of land ambulances in 2008. So there were, prior to that, no unannounced inspections of any sort of ambulance. Is that correct?
Well, other than the fact that it wasn't formally called out already. I mean,
Okay.
there were visits, service visits, okay? And, but in order to accomplish what the Auditor General wanted, and that's to call it unannounced and to carry on as an unannounced,
So-
that's what we incorporated.
So the procedure that was put into place in 2008, in fact, came out of the auditor's
Yes.
prior reports.
Right.
For
That's
which
right.
you've been at this
That's
committee
right.
before. What led you to hope you never saw him again?
No, it's not
Sorry
Jim.
about that,
I would
Jim.
never say that. No,
I'm sorry, I'm teasing.
I
I
know.
shouldn't be teasing because this is serious, but my apologies. Can we talk a little bit about the complaint process, which is attached to all this investigation? And can you tell us then, regardless of whether it's a land ambulance complaint or an air ambulance complaint, once you get that complaint, what is triggered?
Well, a file is opened by our investigation section, and then what takes place is, as I say, a lengthy process in terms of gathering the information. Every ambulance call is taped, all right, so you have access to that verbal information, the voice information. That's gathered together with the ambulance call records by the investigator in advance. Normally, they call the operator and say, please send this information to us. They do that. The investigator starts sorting through what the actual situation was. The investigator then will normally go and interview whoever was on the call, for instance, and any complainant with respect to what took place. Will then make observations and commit that to a report that will be presented to the manager of investigations and subsequently to the, and go back. Normally we also go back to the operator to say this is what we found, and then a situation will be followed up after the report is sent to the complainant, and after the operator is informed as to what the actual problems were, if any. Sometimes the investigator simply says everything was fine. But in some instances there are problems. A paramedic may make a mistake or contravene a standard. Remember, we're looking at whether it's a contravention of the act or any standard as far as investigations go. And then we'll follow up with the operator to ensure that remediation takes place, that if it's a paramedic that needs remediation, and depending upon the severity of what the paramedic did, he can either be remediated or she can be remediated locally, and we're told what happens, and or he can be brought before a committee, a quality committee as we call it, to determine from his peers in the base hospital, to determine if indeed they're going to recommend to me that that particular paramedic should rewrite the examination to be a paramedic.
So those would be, I think the outcomes that you've described there would be when you found a problem
That's
with
right.
the actions of an individual. What would be the possible outcomes if the problem was related to a flaw on behalf of the service provider, be it land or air ambulance?
Yes, of course that happens. Well, the discussion would take place if it's a land service. It's the field manager that in the local area that talks to the operator to determine what needs to be done. And if it's Orange, it's a manager that we have under the senior manager of operations that follows up with Orange to determine what the changes are and what needs to be done, and whether or not they've actually followed up.
And then you mentioned earlier in your remarks that in some circumstances the file might be turned over to the coroner, and there are legislated requirements for that. Could you briefly give us a sense
Sure.
of what's the legislative bar for turning it over to the coroner?
Well, under the Coroner's Act, I think it's Section 10, it lists a number of situations. An unexpected death, for instance, is one that our manager of investigations would determine that's the case, particular with respect to this deceased patient, and will notify the coroner that he is conducting an investigation. Then the coroner will make a decision as to whether or not he wants a copy of the report. If he does want a copy of the report, it's sent to the coroner. The coroner then determines what action he will take.
Okay, and so it's up to the coroner at that point, as in any coroner's situation, whether the coroner moves into a full-scale inquiry or
exactly. Whether there's an inquest, it will follow. That's
and
right.
In your experience, when you do turn the information over, have there been occasions when it, either land or air, does the coroner frequently then go on to investigate further, or does the coroner tend to review the file and say, no, this doesn't warrant further attention?
I don't know if you can call it frequently, okay? But it does happen that the coroner will utilize, and frequently does utilize, our investigation report to determine whether or not he wants to conduct an inquest, and we'll talk to our manager of investigation. But it's not a frequent situation that inquests are called with respect to ambulance services in the province.
Okay. So thank you for that. Now, I wanted to ask you about a couple of issues that there's been some public discussion of. Mr. Klees had brought up a question in the House on Monday about you wanting to issue a directive to Ornge, and Mr. Klees said that your ADM told you not to do this. And in fact, I believe we've passed another motion here today looking for production of emails and things that, you know, might substantiate or not this. But can you clarify, or do you have any idea what this is referring to, and can you give some clarity to what is happening here?
Absolutely.
2 minutes left in this.
Just by way of background, the Auditor General, again, and we thank the Auditor General, pointed out that there were some significant adverse events in his report that had transpired at Ornge, and that possibly the Ministry of Health was not informed of those. And indeed, that was the case when we followed up with Ornge. We went through all of the situations that the Auditor General had listed and determined that I believe there were at least 3, maybe 4 situations in which we should have been notified and we should have been in a position of investigating. And so we initiated investigations on those. I met with, and plus there were a number of other investigations initiated, and as I mentioned before, there are 50 now outstanding with Ornge. That's a substantial number. We then found out a number of other complaints started coming in as a result of a media coverage, and but we had to investigate. So we initiated investigations on a number of those types of situations. I met with staff from Ornge, April the 4th, I believe, and it's in this particular investigation report that was, I believe, Mr. Klees had a copy of it, and indicated that, and I think it's on page 13, the Ministry recommended that Ornge work with many stakeholders such as unions, land ambulance operators, hospitals to establish a 5-year plan. Now, I want to say that Ornge is in a challenging situation. This is not easy to get out of the situation that Ornge is in. I don't know exactly why they're in that particular situation, because, as I said before, prior to 2011, or in 2011, we were assured by the people at Ornge that they were training critical care paramedics, they were providing more paramedics, the staffing was fine. All of a sudden, the staffing is not so fine. They have difficulty staffing. I don't think there's any thing that you don't already know about. They have problem staffing with paramedics, the level of care with the paramedics, primary versus critical care. They have problem staffing with their pilots, co-pilots. I said to them, I recommend that you go to your stakeholders, you talk to them, you develop a plan, a staffing plan. It's important to have a staffing plan to give us confidence that you're doing something to dig yourself out of this particular problem. I said to them, this isn't going to be solved overnight, and I think Dr. McClellan said the same thing when he was here. This is a substantial problem that Ornge has, and that it's necessary to try and determine how you're going to do this. I said, it may even take 5 years to do this, but let's be open and transparent with that, and talk to your stakeholders and try and make some arrangements for that particular problem that you're encountering. They said they would think about it, all right? In the meantime, we're getting more situations coming to us, more problems associated with staffing, associated with level of care, primary care instead of critical care, more investigations happening. I said to myself, I have to do something about this. I have to, and I developed draft director's orders, because there's not a lot of things that emergency health services can do, in all honesty, except under the Ambulance Act. It says, if an operator has contravened a standard or requirement of this act or the regulations, and the contravention would constitute a failure to meet the certification criteria referred in Section 8, the director may, all right, order the operator to remedy the contravention within the time frame specified. So, you don't always have to issue these orders. The mere threat sometimes achieves something, in my experience. I don't believe I've ever issued orders in the past. I don't know if a previous director issued orders. But the fact that there's a mere threat and they know that this is possible, all right, it may have come into effect, because we met with them again 2 weeks ago. I once again said, where is the staffing plan? I mean, you've got to have some idea of where you're going to be, where you're going to go, and how you're going to get there, sort of thing, because this is such a significant item. And I said to my ADM, Patricia Lee, that I'm drafting these, all right, I want you to know that, sort of thing. Her direction at that time was, well, okay, but let's not proceed at this time. And she was right, okay, because a week later, well, actually, I think it was June the 5th, the staffing plan arrived at her office from Ornge. And so from that perspective, she was absolutely right that this indeed generated what we were looking for at that particular point in time. Now, a staffing plan doesn't solve the problem, but it helps, all right? And they indicated that they've told us that they've added additional paramedics, that they're hiring more pilots. I think they put out a press release on that recently. We're very pleased that they're doing that. I still know that this is not going to be an easy road for them to hoe. It's difficult. It's hard. They have a very large challenge in front of them because, quite frankly, the name Ornge is tarnished. I think we all know that, sort of thing. And it's difficult to hire and hire the type of people that you need to do that. And that's why it does take some time. In the meantime, they've hired additional staff. They've hired Bruce Farr, an excellent ambulance person, and several other people in their organization. It gives us more confidence, all right, going forward, that they have an idea of where they have to go. So that's the situation with respect to the director's orders.
So would it be,
your
I'll just borrow a little bit.
You're about 4 minutes over right now.
That's okay. So the direction from the ADM wasn't so much don't follow up on the problem.
absolutely
That
not.
wasn't the order.
No.
The order was we may be able to resolve
That's
this
right.
without a
And we
director's
met with them,
order.
and Patricia was there and assisted in generating what we needed to have.
So you resolved the situation without a director's order, but a resolution was
That's right.
achieved.
Now, that does not say that there will not
I
be future
understand.
director's orders.
Yeah, and I understand that the resolution of having to hire
That's
more
right.
people is a work in progress. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll now move to the opposition. Mr. Klees?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Bates, thank you for clarifying the fact that you, in fact, did draft the director's order,
Yes.
which was the appropriate thing to do.
Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that you did forward it to Patricia Lee.
Yes.
And thank you for clarifying that Patricia Lee made the decision that it shouldn't go forward
At this
that
time.
point in time.
At this time, sorry.
Fair enough, and that's all I made sure was public. I think that the issue here is, and you have to understand that all of us around this table are very concerned that the Ministry of Health does its part when it comes to oversight and hold Orange accountable. That is largely what the Auditor General's report was about.
Absolutely.
And so with that, I'd like to start by reviewing your testimony of April 18th. In response to a question that I put to you about whether the original performance agreement obligated the Ministry of Health to oversee Orange, you replied at that time, I'll just quote from Hansard, "I agree that the Ministry of Health and the Emergency Health Services branch have and had oversight responsibilities, and that oversight responsibility was basically set in line by the Ambulance Act, by the Performance Agreement, and by the Transfer of Payment Directive."
Yes.
The end of the quote. You stand
Right.
by that statement.
I do.
So there are basically three areas of authority that you relied on for your, first of all, your authority and obligation to provide that oversight.
Yes, that's true.
And as the Director of Emergency Health Services, would it have been your responsibility to ensure that that oversight was then carried out consistent with those three authorities?
To the best of our ability.
So prior to the consolidation of the air ambulance services into this new organization that we're dealing with now, can you just briefly describe what your branch's involvement was with the air ambulance service within the province? What responsibilities did the Emergency Health Services branch have?
Oh, okay, fine. The fact of the matter was that it was a ministry operation, if you want to call it that, prior to Orange taking over. We had, as I said, a small ambulance unit, air ambulance unit. We still had the same number of investigators as we have now, other than two that have been added recently. We operated the communications center directly with ministry staff. Up until 2000, the paramedics, I think it was 2001, under the previous government, the decision was made to divest, is a word, the paramedics to the private sector, that being to the dedicated air operators, Canadian Helicopters and Voyageurs. So they became employees of the air operators. We funded all of this. We went out to RFPs for the operators and contracted with them. We did investigations when it was necessary, and we funded the system.
Okay. So you had a dedicated team. You refer to it as the air ambulance unit. How many people would have been in that air ambulance unit?
I believe about 4 or 5.
4 or 5.
It would go up and down.
Okay.
Not many.
That team was intact. It obviously had considerable expertise and experience in air ambulance. I'm assuming they kind of grew with the air ambulance organization. As Mr. Rusk this morning indicated, it really was an organic growth that took place within the government. Were most of these people in this unit from the very beginning?
There were retirements. There was one gentleman, Mr. Stott, who was there for, and I believe he's the gentleman Mr. Rusk went with. Wayne was around for a large number of years. I think Mr. Rusk mentioned the manager, Mr. Brown, that was hired. And there were people that, came and went sort of thing over the years.
Okay. When the transition took place to the consolidation plan, was that team then assigned to assume the oversight responsibilities for the new entity?
No,
And why would that be the case?
because the team was disbanded, if you want to call it that, in the sense of they went on. I mean, the fact of the matter is, 1 or 2 of them still partially work on air ambulance. There's no dedicated person in emergency health services at this particular point in time with respect to air ambulance. Now, there is going to be now an oversight unit hired under the direction of Patricia Lee, but at this particular point in time, there are several people that work on air ambulance, and all of us right now are working full-time on air ambulance, to be truthful, but at the other times they're working on land ambulance and base hospitals and a number of different functions they perform.
Okay. I'm assuming that you were well familiar and privy to the negotiation of the performance agreement by which Ornge would conduct its business. Would that be a reasonable assumption on my part?
I was not involved in the negotiation of the performance agreement.
But were you familiar with the performance agreement?
Yes.
So you knew the complexity of that performance agreement, and you would be familiar with all of the oversight responsibilities incorporated into that performance agreement, which are considerable. Can you share with us why, given the ongoing oversight responsibilities that the Ministry of Health would have over the air ambulance operations, why the very unit within the Ministry of Health that had the experience to provide that oversight would be disbanded?
Well, I have to go back to 2003, if you don't mind. In 2003, Mr. Hugh McLeod directed that myself and other people within the Emergency Health Services branch provide every assistance to Dr. Mazza, all right, who would be the lead on the transformation and the movement from the current system at that particular point in time to a not-for-profit agency. Dr. Mazza had the lead from 2003 to 2005. He was instrumental in ensuring that the unit was not carried on, that oversight was not as perhaps as rigorous as it should have been, if you will, sort of thing. He was the main player in the movement from the ministry service to the not-for-profit organization, and from 2005 to 2007 I worked for Dr. Mazza since he was seconded to the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, and he provided executive leadership to myself.
So it's true then that you were under direct orders from the Associate Deputy Minister Hugh McLeod to support Dr. Mazza in his plans, and basically, let me ask you this, basically support Dr. Mazza in his plan to transform the air ambulance service. Would that be a correct
Well,
term?
I think it would be probably more than support. It would be do what Dr. Mazza told us to do.
So Dr. Mazza, who was on the outside, all of a sudden became crowned with authority within the Ministry of Health, so that someone as senior as you was now being told by Dr. Chris Mazza what to do.
That's right.
Was there ever any correspondence, either a letter or an email or emails, that gave you that direction?
Indeed there was. I could show
you have it
one
with you?
today. I do have them with me.
If you could provide that to the committee, I would appreciate that.
There are some of them. I have other ones, but
Mr. Bates,
sorry. I'm sorry.
approximately how many pieces of correspondence would you have given to the clerk?
10.
About 10, and they would be This would be correspondence. It looks as though they were primarily emails. Were there letters as well?
Well, no, there were no letters. I
Okay,
believe
emails.
They're emails.
Basically coming from the Associate Deputy Minister of Health, Mr. McLeod, to you and others.
Several of them were, but several of them are minutes of meetings that Dr. Mazza conducted and that type of thing.
I'd like to share with you a motion that I put forward to this committee on May the 30th. And I'm going to read it into the record because I think it's very important. The motion reads as follows: that the Standing Committee on Public Accounts pursuant to Standing Order 110B, whereby each committee shall have power to send for persons, papers, and things, request a copy of any and all correspondence, including letters and or emails, from the Associate Deputy Minister of Health, Hugh McLeod, to Malcolm Bates, Director of Emergency Health Services Branch, and Dennis Brown, and any other person at the Emergency Health Services Branch, in which the Associate Deputy Minister references Ornge or gives direction concerning the role that the EHS branch is to have concerning Ornge, or relates to matters to allow Dr. Mazza to do whatever he determines appropriate at Ornge, and not to obstruct him during the period October 1, 2005, and the last day of February 2007, or makes any reference to how the Emergency Health Services Branch and its staff is to monitor, oversee, hold accountable, or review the performance of Ornge, and that said correspondence be delivered to the clerk of the Public Accounts Committee no later than Thursday, May 31, 2012. Mr. Bates, that was the motion we put forward. It was subsequently referred to the Ministry of Health. Are you familiar with that motion?
I am.
And when you were presented with this motion, what did you do?
I searched my records for exactly what the motion requested.
And the material, the correspondence that you provided to the clerk just now, was a result of that search?
No, it was not,
Okay. And why was it not?
because the material I provided to the clerk dated from 2003 and 2004, and the motion required between 2005 and 2007 information.
Thank you very much.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate that clarification. And we appreciate the fact that you have been forthcoming with that information. It is a big lesson for us here, and that is that whether it's this proceeding or others, apparently the letter is much more important than the spirit. You, sir, understood what it was that we were seeking, and I appreciate you providing us with that information.
You're welcome.
Why do you believe that Mr. McLeod made the decision to essentially take your authority away and hand it to Dr. Mazza?
I believe he was given direction, but I'm not sure. In the information we have, it was direction from, well, I will tell you back in 2003, firsthand, I know that direction was given by the minister's office in 2003 that this particular transfer from the ministry to a not-for-profit organization was to be accomplished and accomplished quickly. And there is evidence of that as well. In 2004, it carried on in the same vein that this would be accomplished. It was not whether, according to Mr. McLeod, it was how soon.
And did you ever get any indication as to where Mr. McLeod's directive came from?
Well, as I said, in 2003, it was relatively clear to me because I met with Mr. Mianis, Michael Mianis, who was the chief of staff to the Associate Minister Dan Newman. And at that particular point in time, Mr. Mianis was very clear with us that the proponents of this particular service change wanted it done and wanted it done quickly, and the minister supported that.
And then there was an election.
October the 3rd.
And post-October 3rd, new government,
That's right.
new players. Who was then in charge?
Hugh MacLeod was still in charge at that particular point in time. It was the same deputy at that particular point in time.
And who was the minister?
It was Mr. Smitherman, Minister Smitherman.
And would Mr. Smitherman have had anything to do with this direction?
Absolutely.
And so now, notwithstanding the past, we're into a new government. And now we have Mr. Smitherman as the minister. And Mr. Smitherman would then have endorsed or directed Mr. MacLeod to implement the MAZA strategy, or the MAZA scheme as I prefer to refer to it. Is that correct?
As far as I know, that's correct.
Okay. So now the implementation takes place. The performance agreement is negotiated and we have substantial oversight responsibilities built into the performance agreement. You're still the director. I understand that at some point, obviously, and maybe you can clarify for me, at what point was your unit disbanded, the air ambulance unit within Emergency Health Services branch?
As soon as the Ornge transfer took place, transfer to Ornge.
So with the skeleton staff that you had left, obviously it still fell to you as the director to carry out whatever obligations were in that performance agreement. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you put in place, given the complexity of that, did you at any time put in place the resources, a structure that would allow you to provide that oversight on a regular basis?
Well, we already had the certification unit that was established as a result of a transfer to the municipal sector of a land ambulance system, and that was a major part of what we're doing. We already had the investigation section, as I mentioned previously. Those are the main points of oversight. We already had the financial staff that we carried on as well, because we're a fairly large branches, and the reason why we were visited by Mr. McCarter regularly is because we meet his financial requirements. So we're a fairly large branch, and we had the financial people in place to review things as well.
So in order to ensure
You have
that,
about a minute left unless you want to keep going on that.
if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just finish this part of my questioning,
Yep,
if I
go
could
ahead.
borrow some time from the next session. Given the complexity, one would think that it might be a good idea to have a checklist of all of the various components of oversight required. Did your branch ever compile a checklist that would be used
Yes.
to do this?
Yes, we have a checklist of the performance agreement. We have a checklist of a new the amended performance agreement.
I'm going to ask the clerk to distribute a copy of what is entitled Performance Agreement Annual Report Checklist, and it's dated January to July 2006. And if the clerk could give a copy of that to Mr. Bates, I would appreciate it. I'd like to just run through a couple of items with you here. This is a very, while it's being distributed, this is a very detailed checklist. It deals with everything from operational issues, as you're well aware, to the financial standards. Was this checklist ever implemented?
It was implemented last year.
It was implemented last year.
Yeah.
It was prepared in 2006,
Yes.
and it's now 2012, and last year it was implemented.
Yes.
Why was it not implemented?
Well, The cooperation from Orange was not the greatest, if you will. It was not, we had difficulty securing information from them. We had difficulties getting this type of information from them. And I think I mentioned that before.
Mr. Bates, I'd like to refer to the Auditor General's report, and I'll just read one paragraph from page 12 of his report, and I quote, "In light of the high degree of responsibility and decision-making power the performance agreement gave Orange, it was important." This is the Auditor General's report. Surely you have a copy of it.
Yes, I just missed what you're reading from.
In light of I'll start from the beginning. If someone could give Mr. Zimmer a coffee, that'll keep him awake. Okay. In light of the high degree of responsibility and decision-making power the performance agreement gave Orange, it was important for the ministry to have adequate processes in place to protect its interests. End of quote. I think that, what I see here is that there was an intent on the part of the Emergency Services Branch to provide that oversight. The groundwork was done for a very comprehensive checklist that, as we read through it, and I'll spend some time with the committee going through it, that probably 99% of the issues that went wrong over the last number of years would not have gone wrong had the Emergency Services Branch been able to conduct its regular reviews. Would you agree with that?
I would agree that it would have been of assistance. I don't know. It would be difficult for me to agree or disagree with what you say.
Was there ever a direction from either Mr. McLeod or an associate deputy, an assistant deputy minister, or anyone superior to you not to use this document?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
I didn't know that it existed.
When did you come to realize that it did exist?
The gentleman who put that together, Mr. Nishman, is still with us, and it was something which, because things radically changed at Orange in 2000, the latter part of 2011, and because the Auditor General was visiting Orange, if you will, sort of thing, then he brought forward again the checklist, and I insisted that we work with Orange to go through it. And in fact, he did that. He met with Orange and went through the checklist with them, and came back with a filled-out checklist for us.
Okay, Chair, I'll defer to the next round, please.
Okay, very well. We'll move on to the NDP then. Ms. Jones?
I still don't understand about the checklist. It was there, it had been done from somebody from your branch, but you didn't know it existed.
No, it wasn't that we didn't know it existed. I indicated that for 2 years, Dr. Mazza was in charge of everything. He was appointed as executive lead. He gave us directions. There was no indication or desire to apply that sort of checklist to Orange as a result of his obvious close scrutiny over what was happening in the Orange situation.
So Dr. Mazza was not only controlling the operation, it was also controlling the part of the ministry that had oversight of those operations.
Exactly.
Has this ever happened to you in your career before, that the people directing operation also direct the people that offer oversight to those operations?
Never.
Did you ever think to mention to other people within your ADM or your supervisor that that was a weird arrangement?
The ADM appointed Dr. Mazza.
So there was no point in going to the ADM?
I wouldn't think so.
No, I see where you I see where you're going with this. Looking back, do you figure that was part of the problem?
I don't know what, listen, there were 3 ministers that supported the transfer to Orange. There was an associate minister, 2 deputy ministers, an ADM, a red tape commission. All of these individuals supported what was happening and what took place. In my position, it was not a situation in which, even if I objected to something, I'm not sure they would have listened.
Okay. I'd like to check on one thing. You did have contact with Orange, and people within your branch had contact with Orange. When were you made aware that the for-profit entities were going to share revenues with the government?
I think that was, it was a concept that Dr. Mazza put forward, I think around 2008.
That's what you said before?
But there was nothing very specific until they came in to meet with the ministry in January of 2011.
And did you attend that meeting?
I did.
And who else attended?
Large number of people. I think, I'm not sure if you have a copy of it, but there was Mr. Apps, Mr. Lapine, several other people from Orange, a deputy, myself, a number of other individuals from the ministry.
Anybody from the minister's political staff?
I don't recall.
No? Anybody from the minister's office?
I don't recall that either. It's
No.
possible, it's likely, but I don't recall.
It's likely, but you don't recall?
No.
So from 2008 on, you had conversations with Orange. Orange tells you that they are looking, that they intend to purchase aircraft, that they intend to set up for-profit venture, and they keep you are aware of this. Then you become more knowledgeable about the 3% of revenue for the for-profit is going to come back to the government.
Well, I mean, that was basically a concept. Nothing like that ever happened.
I realize it didn't happen. I'm more interested as to when was this information shared?
With respect to the 3% or whatever it was,
The 3%, yeah.
2011.
In the
It may have been 2010. They presented us with 5-year plans, as I said, and I'm not exactly sure if it was in one of their 5-year plans. But going back, as I say, it was clear in 2003 they wanted to generate revenue, and in 2008 they provided us with a plan that indicated for sure that they were going to generate revenue of some sort or another. In fact, they did generate some small amount of revenue by charging for training paramedics, and in 2010 I think they entered into an agreement with respect to simulators and so on that they were working on, and they did a consulting piece of work in Saskatchewan. So they were generating a very small amount of revenue.
Did they share any of those revenues with the ministry, or
No.
no, because
Well, it was small, and
it was...
I don't think they would have shared it because, as I understand it, they established for-profit companies, okay? The first for-profit company that we learned of was Orange Peel, all right?
And when did you hear about Orange Peel?
2008.
Okay. And you figured that it was Orange Peel that were doing those activities?
I'm not sure why. Our mandate was a performance agreement, and the performance agreement only covered Orange. It didn't cover these other entities.
Okay. So when Orange paid for weight overpayments to the helicopter company, you would have considered this as not part of your accountability agreement?
Didn't know anything about it.
You didn't know?
No.
No?
They wouldn't tell us that sort of thing.
Okay. How often would you meet with Dr. Mazza?
Dr. Massa? He would call me up in the early years. He would phone me usually in a tirade or something, certainly not very happy about whatever was taking place, maybe once a month, once every 2 months. After 2010, didn't meet with, other than the fact we met with him once when we had a meeting at Orange, he was there. But other than that, we didn't meet when he was engaged in other activities, I would assume.
Because Maria Renzella, you know who she is,
Yes?
testified that you were Dr. Mazza's primary contact.
Well, that's incorrect. It was Dennis Brown.
It was Dennis Brown that was the primary contact of Dr. Mazza?
That's right.
How do you know that?
Because that's what Dennis was intended to do. That was his responsibility.
Okay. And do you know that he did have meeting with Dr. Mazza?
He didn't necessarily have me as meetings per se. He had a telephone dialogue.
Okay. Do you want to go?
Sure. So do you recall ever taking any phone calls from or meeting Alfred Apps or Mr. Dongai?
I had one letter from Mr. Apps.
Sure.
I've never heard of Don Guy before, to be truthful.
Okay.
I had one letter from Mr. Apps who wanted to meet with the ministry. He was coming through me as the Director of Emergency Health Services. He wanted to meet and explain the new legal entities that they were starting, just as Ms. Jelena mentioned. And I went to our legal branch, because it's not my prerogative to deal with lawyers.
Right.
And I asked them what I should do. He wanted to meet with legal branch. Legal branch told me to write back to Mr. Apps and say that he should explain whatever he wanted to explain to the Myers, Norris, Penny auditors at that particular time that was underway.
Okay.
That's what I did. I had one other, I didn't meet, pardon me?
Sorry to interrupt you. When did that happen? When was that, roughly?
2009,
Okay. And you said you had one other...
2010, I think it's 2009.
2000, and you had one other interaction. You said you were about to explain when that was.
With Mr. Apps, yes. And that was...
What was that? Was that a phone call, an email, or a...
No, I attended a meeting where Mr. Apps was present.
Yes?
And that was in the Provincial Controller's office
Okay.
in 2008.
And what was the nature of that discussion or that meeting?
Orange was vehemently opposed to consolidation
Right.
under the books of the province.
Right?
And Mr. Apps was their representative,
Representing Orange?
representing Orange.
Right. Okay. I was going to ask you, Mel Springman raised some concerns. In 2004, you indicated that his concerns were factually incorrect. He raised some concerns about Orange. Do you recall making that?
I think if you read whatever it is that you have, but I didn't say that his concerns were incorrect. I neither disagree or agree. I want to say from the beginning that I have the highest regard for Mr. Springman as an individual and as a lawyer.
Sure.
I know of no one that I've dealt with that I have greater respect for in those particular areas. And if you'll permit me to provide you some background related to this?
I'll pause you for one moment. We'll come back to that.
Okay.
He raised some concerns about Orange, though, in general. Would you agree with that, with respect to the direction that Orange was headed with the consolidation of the aviation? And he had some concerns with that.
Yes.
Now, it turns out, now in hindsight, that his concerns were quite prophetic. It turns out that what he was concerned about was essentially the turning point where things went very much downhill for Orange. in retrospect, do you agree that Mr. Springman's concerns were quite, would you agree with that comment, that they were quite prophetic and they were quite insightful?
Well, let me just say that Mr. Springman and myself had different directions, okay? I was directed to follow what Mr. McLeod and Dr. Mazza were intending to do.
Right.
That was my direction. As a civil servant, I follow that direction.
No, that's fair. And
You know,
actually,
and-
that's my next area, that you were receiving that direction, and that you indicated that direction, that, would you describe that as almost like a pressure? And
I'm
that-
sorry?
Would you describe that direction that you received as essentially you were being pressured a particular direction?
Well, I'm not sure pressured. I mean, it certainly was direction, and direction is direction.
That's fair enough.
You know?
It becomes your job to move in that direction.
I was directed to come here. I'm here.
And just to make it clear, you indicated you were listing off 3 ministers, 2 deputy ministers, and 1 ADM.
That's right.
All knew what was going on and supported what was going on.
That's right.
And just to clarify that, what did you mean by supported what was going on?
Well, they were prime movers, if you will, if you know that term,
Yeah.
towards changing the air ambulance system from a government ministry operated to one that was the full responsibility was given to a not-for-profit agency or organization called Ornge, or OAA at that time.
And were these same people, they were all supportive of specifically Dr. Mazza's view of how to implement that?
Exactly.
Okay. And they were all aware of his vision of what he wanted to implement?
Well, I assume they were if they supported it, but
That's good.
Do you mind, just for the record, to name those 3 ministers, the ADM, et cetera?
Minister Clement, Minister Smitherman, Minister Flaherty, Associate Minister Newman, Associate Deputy Minister Hugh McLeod, Deputy Minister Phil Hassam, Deputy Minister Ron Sapsford, ADM Mary Curtis Burton, Frank Sheehan, Red Tape Commission.
Okay. Would you say that by the time Minister Kaplan became Minister of Health, that he was also aware of what was going on at Ornge, or not anymore?
I know that, and this is all I know, that Dr. Mazza visited the new minister. I don't know what transpired. I don't know how much anyone was aware of what was taking place.
Did you receive directives after Dr. Mazza visited with Minister Kaplan or the directive given to you changed?
No.
Or you continued with
No
the same?
directive whatsoever, no direction.
Okay, so whatever had been there before just continued?
That's correct.
Okay. When Tom Lepine came to testify, he said, he's quoting you, and said, "Tom, it would be so much easier if Chris would just report his salary."
Yeah.
Do you remember saying that to Mr. Lepine?
Mr. Lepine, and I read his transcript, said that I did that many times. Mr. Lepine, unfortunately, has a memory that doesn't quite extend properly. I'll tell you what happened, all right?
Sure.
What transpired was, we knew that because of Orange Peel and so on, we knew, I mean, you check the sunshine list, Dr. Mazza's no longer there. No, it was quite clear that he wasn't there. Mr. Lepine was on it. Of course, nobody told us he was also securing a salary from another part of Orange. That didn't show up on the sunshine list, as you know. So we were told that as far as Orange Peel goes, it's not covered under the public salary disclosure to list the people there because, number one, it was indirect funding, and number two, it was a for-profit organization, okay? So that settled that as far as we were concerned. There was more concern expressed, I think, because in 2010 there was some information, again, questioning why Dr. Mazza was not on that list. And again, it was verified that that was still the case with respect to the public salary disclosure. Mr. Lepine is referring to situation that happened, I believe, around December, and I believe your party brought this up in the legislature about Dr. Mazza's salary, if I'm not mistaken, on December the 5th. And so shortly thereafter, the question down through my ADM, Patricia Lee, and myself was, why aren't they reporting, and how can we get them to report, sort of thing. So Patricia and I called Tom Lapine. Tom Lapine said, I'll take it back, and I think we can accommodate you. In other words, provide the salaries of the executives who are not on the Sunshine List. The next day he called me back and said, no, we're not going to do it. The board has decided that it won't provide that information. At that point in time, I said, Tom, you know, why? It would be so much easier to, if I use those words, and I can't verify that I did because who remembers words they use, but some of that effect, why won't they provide that information? It was another 4 weeks or thereafter, and due to the tenacity of the minister, that they actually finally provided the information that was required.
That's 4 weeks after...
After we had spoken to him.
Okay,
so I'm not sure it's 4 weeks, but it's certainly a period of time that they stonewalled the ministry, if you want to use that term, would not provide the information.
Okay, so in...
A couple minutes on this.
Okay, so in 2010, the NDP asked about the salary disclosure. You start asking Tom, and...
2010?
I think he means 2011.
No, it's 2011, December the 5th, 2011. It was in the legislature.
You're talking about a question during question period?
Yes.
Ms. Jelas is referring to questions asked in a committee.
Oh, I see.
Put to, and also a request, a Freedom of Information request for Mr. Dr. Mazza's salary.
Well, I was not involved with that.
So you know,
Sorry.
you know that his salaries are apparently not being disclosed
Yes.
because it is for the for-profit. But you have their financial statement. You can see that there are executive compensations being paid out of the government funds.
No, that's not visible on the information provided to us, and the Auditor General will verify that.
So
That is not provided, or was not provided to us. Under the new performance agreement, revised performance agreement, it's much different, much more rigorous.
So the financial information you got was one big lump sum that included delivery of service, executive...
We did not get information on these outside companies, if you want to call it that. That was not provided to us.
No, I realize that was not provided to you. What I'm saying is that the money that you transfer to Orange not-for-profit, because the government
Right.
transferred $130 to $150 million
Yes.
a year to Orange not-for-profit. In the money that you transferred to Orange not-for-profit, there were money allocated to compensation of the admin staff.
We did not get detailed information. We did know that there was a chargeback, if you will, all right, for administrative costs, all right, but no breakdown.
So, and the chargeback for administrative
From
costs
Orange Peel.
was the salaries of the people...
Well, we don't know because it didn't specify salaries. It just...
Administrative
wouldn't.
costs, and you
Yeah.
never asked questions?
Our financial, well, first of all, number one, I asked for an audit in 2008, all right? We did. We were, as part of our oversight, I said, I need an audit of what's taking place at Orange in 2008. I went to the Ministry of Finance and my staff and asked for an audit to be conducted in 2008.
And
what happened with that request?
do you want to keep using time, or you're out of time otherwise?
Just one more minute.
What happened with that request?
That request turned into the Myers-Norris Penny review conducted by the Ministry of Finance internal audit.
And did it require any salary disclosure issues, or did it cover any specific issues around oversight?
What it said was that Orange is providing and spending the money efficiently, effectively, and according to the purposes intended.
And that was the finding of the report in 2008?
That was a finding of the report.
Wow.
Okay. When you went to Orange, when was the last time you went to Orange?
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago? Okay. You had been there before.
Yes,
Had you ever seen the motorcycle in the front lobby?
once.
Okay. What was your thought when you saw a motorcycle in the front lobby?
I think it was the same as yours.
Which would be?
Somewhat outrageous, and their contention was that it was as a result of funding contributed by a supplier. They purchased that particular one, and they also went to Rogers Center and a Blue Jays game. If you check in their website, you'll see Dr. Mazza and the chap from Orange County Choppers, I think is the name of the organization, on that particular chopper. And it was an event that they intended, I believe, to kickstart their charitable work in the future. And but I never anticipated seeing that motorcycle in that particular building at the front lobby.
Okay. And you knew then that public fund had been used because it was something that Orange had intention to do, start a fundraising effort?
No, that's not as far as I am aware. They said that they secured that money as a donation for those particular, the two motorcycles. I think there's two. I never didn't realize until the Auditor General pointed out there were two of these particular vehicles.
Vehicle. All right. I'll keep my minutes.
Very well, thank you. And would the committee like the Meyer-Norris-Dennis report tabled with the committee? Yes, okay, we'll get that, we can get that report. We'll move on to the government. Ms.
Thank
Santos.
you. So I've just gotten these emails which you tabled, Mr. Bates. I guess some of them are emails and some of them are minutes of a meeting. So I'm just trying to cast my mind back to dates. The first in this sequence is September the 4th of 2003. And that was, I believe, either the day before the writ dropped, or the day the writ dropped, or the day after the writ dropped, but, you know, the beginning of the election, plus or minus one. And we have the record of a meeting that was called to order by Hugh, which seems to refer to Hugh MacLeod. And just picking a little bit here, the Deputy Minister of Health and the ADM for Acute Care Services want to create a more responsive and agile air ambulance program. They want to create a public sector not-for-profit organization that strips away bureaucratic layers. I'm skipping here, obviously. The new organization will be a separate legal entity. And then skipping down further, Dr. Chris Mazza is charged by the Deputy Minister and the ADM, Hugh MacLeod, to produce an assessment of how this is accomplished, not whether, just how. We then go on to another meeting in September 8th of 03, which I'm virtually certain is after the writ dropped. Dr. Mazza seems to be the person running this meeting, and says that the purpose of the meeting is to develop an implementation process for the creation of Air Ambulance Ontario, as well as timelines for implementation. And the team is to have this process developed, analyzed, and ready for implementation by November of 2003. So this is obviously all at the direction of Minister Clement, Associate Minister Newman. And then oddly enough, because my recollection is the same as yours, is that the election was on October the 3rd, 2003, or 7? Second. Sometime with one-digit
Elena will always
numbers.
provide the specifics.
The researcher can get that right for us, okay? And anyway, what's interesting is October the 8th, 2003 would have been a day or two after the election. And again, we seem to have a meeting being provided over by Dr. Mazza, and it goes back and references the previous minutes that I was reading, and starts to go into the implementation details. So I guess, given that what we've learned from previous testimony by Ms. Heinz, Cynthia Heinz, who was a lawyer who had been working at Fasken's on this file beginning in January of 2003 to determine corporate structure, begin to draft a performance agreement, discuss what legislation required revision, and so forth, that there was a very firm direction that you were given by very senior levels to move ahead with this regardless, and the fact that there had been an election lost or won, depending on your particular point of view, doesn't seem to have had anything to do with the direction.
That is a curiosity.
Given that, in fact, we're in that period
Yes.
when there has not yet been a new cabinet. The government is obviously going to change, but there's not yet a new government, and it was still full steam ahead. Am I getting this story correct?
As far as I know.
Okay, thank you for that very much, because this helps, I think, for those of us who have looked at the records and found it very odd that there was all this legal work going on at Fasken's and how this seemed to flow through, and you were being directed not to say anything in objection to this, just carry on with the steamroller, as it were. Anyway, I want to move ahead considerable number of years to this year. In fact, quite recently, because there's been questions raised about whether Ornge is currently having a deficit budget. So, and I know that's a bit out of you're not the person doing the deficit budget, doing budget, but do you, to the best of your knowledge, is Ornge in a deficit position? Have they asked for more money? Have you provided more money?
They have not asked for more money, and we have not provided more money.
And did they table a balanced operating budget?
That budget is still under consideration.
And so the budget that Ornge provided us with is sort of a draft budget.
That's correct.
And when they talk about fiscal year 13, are they talking, do they have the same fiscal year as we do?
Yes.
So this would be
12,
when
13.
this is 12, 13 then.
Right,
They're
yes.
just picking up the last
Yes,
two digits.
right, yes.
So this information is still to be finalized in terms of their budget presentation, but there is no discussion going on about providing extra money. They're flatlined.
They know that they have a 0% increase
Yeah.
this particular fiscal year.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, just looking at the draft that we've been provided with, it would appear that they may be looking at an operating surplus, and that would carry whatever capital debt, that they may have.
Yeah, I'm sorry I can't provide you more
Okay,
detail.
that's fine, but you, from your point of view, they've been told the budget is frozen, stick with it.
That's right.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you. So there were a number of issues involving patient transport, and there were conflicting numbers that we got, or it was unclear about the numbers of patients that Ornge actually transplanted or transported, and there seemed to be two ways of doing the calculation. Can you clarify or give us the correct calculation and the numbers arising from that calculation?
Well, okay, I have to go back somewhat, okay, in the sense of When the ministry was operating a service, I believe the number of air ambulance calls were something in the vicinity of 17,000 per annum. Ornge claimed that they had a service gap, all right, that there were something in the tune of 25 or 26,000 calls, and they were only able to handle, I believe, 19,000 is what they said, but they indicated that the number of calls they were handling each year was increasing, and that they were performing much better each year in terms of efficiency. And those were the details that they provided to us on many occasions. They then took over responsibility for the critical care land ambulance in 2008, 2009, and there were another 2,000 calls thereabouts. Now, we were led to believe that these numbers were correct. They engaged a company called the Hay Group to do a review of the service gap. That service gap is what they provided to us, and although I didn't see a copy of the report, they indicated to us that it was necessary to secure much additional funding if they were going to accommodate the service gap. And we, based upon their information and details and numbers that they gave us, when we requested each year through the results-based planning process additional funds for Ornge. We found out, all right, much to our dismay, after the Auditor General had been in, and I'm sure the Auditor General found out the same thing after he had performed almost all of his work, but the numbers were inflated. And Tom Lapine was the individual that provided us with that information, I think in January 2012, telling us that Dr. Mazza had ordered, all right, that the numbers be inflated. He wanted to show a growth in air ambulance demand, and he showed that over the years up until Tom Lapine provided the accurate information to us. And there was at least an 8% reduction according to the information that Tom Lapine then provided us in 2012. So the number of calls actually did not increase over the period of Ornge's work. They in fact remained static or maybe even decreased, I'm not sure, other than for the calls performed by the critical care land ambulance.
You say there was an 8%?
Yeah, I think they're around,
gap.
I think the total number now, including critical care, is something in the vicinity of 19,000 plus.
That's as of today.
Well, as of the most recent information we have from
Thank you. You know who Jacob Bloom is?
I certainly know who Jacob Bloom is.
Have you worked with Jacob Bloom in the Ornge business?
As I indicated before, I know of one or two meetings with Jacob while he was with Ornge. I know that he met with, as I said, Dennis. I won't repeat what I said before, but he did meet with Dennis from time to time. And I know that he left the employ of Ornge. Well, he left the employ, but he went on sabbatical leave for 1 year from July 2008 until July 2009.
What was your impression of Mr. Bloom's executive skills?
Well, it was difficult for me to assess. I can only say this, that I met with Dr. Mazza at one time, and he had indicated that he thought that Jacob was providing information to us on their future plans. This was, I think, around 2000, early part of 2007, 2008, I should say, and that we had to tell him that Jacob has not been providing us with the information that you think he has been providing us. So that was about the only way I had of evaluating Jacob. Jacob was, in my opinion, certainly a mannerly, certainly a personable individual. I had really nothing to do with him from an executive performance level in Orange.
When you told Dr. Mazza that the information that Mazza thought Bloom was passing on to the ministry was deficient, What was Maz's reaction,
Well, he was somewhat dismayed.
and how did he express that?
Well, just in the sense of he was disappointed. And
And was he disappointed in the sense that he recognized that the information provided by Bloom was deficient, or did he feel the fault lay with the ministry that they had
no, I'm sure he
misinterpreted Bloom's information?
he felt that the problem was with Jacob.
Bill 50, which is the amendment to the Ambulance Act to bring Orange under greater insight, similar to that of a hospital, that's its second reading now. That's a piece that's designed to assess or address the concerns of the Auditor General. Have you had a chance to reflect on Bill 50?
I know that it's in the process. I know that it's ancillary to a new, revised performance agreement, and that it's intended to provide more opportunity should the need arise to step into Orange.
If Bill 50 is passed in its present form, do you think that will go some way to address the difficulties at Orange?
We certainly will assist the situation, a future, not
In the future?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it would address, if there is any situation at Orange now, I think that's intended for that. It's intended for a future situation should a similar type of situation arise, and I think that's necessary in order to plan for the future properly.
Any other observations about, any sense of what the strengths of Bill 50 are, the weaknesses of Bill 50?
No, I'm afraid I can't give you any sort of...
Since the Orange things hit the public domain, as it were, there have been a number of changes at Orange. Have you followed the changes that have been made as this matter's been progressing along?
Yes, I have followed it very closely.
And what is your observation or comment or reaction to those changes that have been started to work through the system at Orange?
Well, as I say, Orange is in a difficult situation, a difficult spot for many varied reasons, one of which is the hearings that we're here today obviously does not foster things at Orange other than to identify where the problems were, sort of thing. They are in a very challenging situation with respect to staffing, with respect to the complaints that arise as a result either of lack of staffing or difficulties with respect to previous complaints that have been lodged, people coming forward with information that perhaps they had not come forward with previously. Orange is endeavoring to address the situation in many varied ways, and we're working with Orange to assist them in every way that the ministry can. And perhaps I can give you some indication of ways that we're doing that.
Well, let me just put it in more. Well, and then Ms. Jasik has some questions.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Bates, we've just had an opportunity to review some of the emails and correspondence that you presented to the committee this afternoon. And I'm sorry to jump around chronologically, but I want to ask you specifically about one email here dated July 12th, 2004, from Hugh MacLeod, the then ADM, to you, to yourself.
Yes.
And I'll just read the whole thing because I want you to sort of get the opportunity to recall this. Chris and I met with the minister, Chris being, I presume, Chris Mazza, and I met with the minister, who on that date would have been Minister Smitherman, on Thursday to discuss next steps. The minister is supportive of the proposed model for consolidation of all aspects of air ambulance to a not-for-profit society. I have asked Chris to take the lead on this file and prepare the necessary slide deck for the minister to take forward. Please work with Chris to action this direction. Also, and this is the bit I really want you to confirm to me, also the minister has requested a detailed breakdown of, in quotes, all fiscal expenditures with particular focus on access to dollars. To quote the minister, he wants to be convinced that we have tactically set in direction how we are going to get the biggest bang for the dollars we have. So this was the way you were starting to look at this project going forward. Could you sort of explain how you took this memo and how you proceeded?
Well, I think it was a very clear direction to myself and my branch. I provided the direction thereafter to the people within my branch as to what was necessary in order to address the direction from obviously the minister and Mr. McLeod, and we worked towards generating the necessary submissions to the government that would in fact accomplish what they were looking for, that is the transfer of responsibility officially to the not-for-profit organization.
Yeah, you have another 3 minutes to use all your time.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So then you were clear in your mind that you were going to give a detailed breakdown of the budget as you knew it in the existing air ambulance program, and you were going to be putting that in front of Hugh McLeod to take to the minister, presumably, so that they could see what assets the ministry at that moment in time had, and that it was your understanding that this would essentially form the basic budget of the new not-for-profit agency.
Yes, and there was also the desire of Dr. Mazza to proceed with the, at that time, we called it the acute care land transfer. It turns into the critical care land ambulance. So that was part of the plan as well as the transfer of the air ambulance.
Could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, the Dr. Mazza had a vision, all right, of ambulance services, an integrated ambulance system that would include not just critical care air ambulance, but also critical care land ambulance. All right. At that point in time, all land ambulance services were provided by the municipal sector, as I know you are well aware. And Dr. Mazza and Mr. McLeod wanted to set up the critical care land ambulance, and that eventually occurred in 2008, as I said before. So that was part of the vision that he had.
And this was all to be done within the same, at that time, the thinking was within the same budget envelope, or how did we get into the next stage of increasing budgets? Or?
Well, there was some funding available for transfer service, all right, in addition to the land ambulance service, because the land ambulance services, as you'll recall, were concerned about interfacility transfers. Yeah, I thought you... That's right.
I remember well.
That's right. And this was part of interfacility transfers, so we had some funds available, and the idea was to utilize those funds to establish a critical care land ambulance as a part of the Orange, as it came to be called later on, system.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify that Minister Smitherman was obviously he was very clear that he wanted to get the biggest bang for the dollars we had, as expressed in that email. Thank you.
Very well, thank you. We'll move on to the official opposition. Mr. Klees.
Thank you, Chair. I guess Mr. Smitherman got a very big bang out of this, didn't he? The fact is, Mr. Bates, that when the transition took place, you've just told us that basically there was virtually no increase in the number of patients who were transferred. The annual budget for our air ambulance service before the Mazza scheme was about $93 million. Is that correct?
I believe so.
And today, what is the amount?
150.
150. Not increase in patient transfer, but a substantial increase.
But please let me explain, okay? Or augment, if you will, sort of thing. There was an angioplasty service assumed by by Orange at additional funding, and the critical care land ambulance was assumed at additional funding. And as I said before, the trend for expenditures in air ambulance, all right, are in fact no greater. In fact, they're less than they are in the land ambulance.
Right.
So even though it's $150 million, and even though we know of all what was taking place behind the scenes, if you will, sort of thing, the expenditures are in fact no greater on the trend line. In fact, they're less than the ministry's increases.
Thank you, Mr. Bates. I'd like to move on to pick up where we left off on the oversight issue. And I heard you talk about the inspections that your branch is responsible for, the air bases, for example. I'd like to focus on the responsibility of oversight that your branch had for Ornge itself, the head office, where, quite frankly, all the decisions are made that end up with the staffing issues at the bases. And this performance agreement checklist that I distributed, we could just go through this. This really, in large part, deals...
Sorry, I don't have a copy of it, sir.
It was... Clerk, did you not pass this to Mr. Bates?
I'm sure we can find another one. Take this one if you like.
I'm sorry.
This checklist, about 90% of this checklist deals really with the responsibilities that Orange had at the Orange head office, so to speak.
Right.
And I'd like to just run through some of this so that we can get a sense of what the intended oversight was and perhaps where the gap was. And I'd like to start with the page number 2. At the bottom, 3.2D, which talks about the communications officers that must be qualified. 3.2E, the communications officers document all calls as per key performance indicators using decision support software and determine most appropriate action. The next page, page 3, at the top of the page, technical connections. Orange shall ensure that communications officers have the technical capacity to communicate, etc. Over to page 4, at the top left-hand, Article 3.3. And by the way, committee members, where it references the article, that is the article in the performance agreement that actually requires this work to be done by Orange and would then be a responsibility for oversight. So 3.3E speaks to the Orange education and evaluation programs that were responsible to be put into place. Page 5, point 4, point 1, and 4.3, that talks about the systems, a new system for communication services that was to have been put in place within 2 years of Orange assuming responsibility. We've heard much about the lack of communication and the number of calls that were either not completed or there was a problem with the communication system. According to the performance agreement, Orange had a responsibility to actually put in place this communication service and ensure that it's functioning. And I'm assuming that the ministry then had a responsibility to oversee that and make sure that it got done according to this document in any event.
Well, can I just say that, in fact, they did, and the Auditor General verified that when he did that. They did install a new system called Optimus, and I think some of the concerns that you're expressing are not so much related to a system they put in, but rather the people utilizing the system.
And that goes to the quality assurance issue, which is also referenced on page 7 under Articles 5.5, 6, and 7, which talks about the necessity under the performance agreement to install a quality assurance system and team and ensure that those people are all properly trained. It goes on the next page, page 8, 6.1 and 6.2, when it talks about the documentation of calls and the responsibility for file and data management. Now, I understand that you've had some problems with Ornge in terms of proper documentation. Again, it comes back to this document in terms of the oversight. My question, Mr. Bates, is simply this. As we run through this, and we don't have the time to go through all this, but numerous times, the performance agreement certainly required Ornge to put all these in place, and so the due diligence was apparently done at the front end to incorporate these responsibilities into the performance agreement. The problem was they didn't do it, or they didn't do a great deal of it, and my question is, given this checklist, given the experience of your branch with air ambulance, knowing the complexity of all of these requirements, why did the Emergency Health Services branch not exercise tighter control and stricter oversight of Ornge?
Well, I would disagree with you, sir, in the sense of we exercised the oversight to the best of our abilities, if you will. The certification exercise, the certification review was done in 2006 and 2009. That's all part of this, to make sure that the documentation is done, to make sure that they maintain this type of system, and they were maintaining it. Whether they were utilizing it properly every time certainly is a question, but the certification reviews showed that they were. The review by the Myers-Norris-Penny showed that they were providing an effective and efficient and money spent according to the purposes intended. Every indication that we had and all the reviews that we conducted indicated that they were performing properly.
Something is pretty fundamental in this document and under the performance agreement. They're required, Ornge was required to use Canadian dollars in all its transactions. There's a $275 million bond offering that's out there in U.S. funds. Where was your branch when it came to that issue? Were you not aware that they were floating a $275 million U.S. bond?
First of all, that was, again, as I say to you, another part of very complex number of companies. Secondly, the fact that they were going to purchase aircraft was made known to the ministry and to the government. Whether it's in U.S. funds or whatever is not something that we in the branch would become involved with, and $275 million, I presumed, was they secured they had a bond offering, and as far as I know, and secured that money in Canadian funds. Whether they purchased the aircraft in American dollars, I presume they probably did, but I'm not.
It's going to have a significant impact on the budget. Given where the Canadian dollar is and where it may go, certainly it could throw that budget off significantly month by month. But that's another issue. This document then goes on to Schedule F, and it talks about the key performance indicators under the performance agreement. Numerous references in that document to the opportunities that the Ministry of Health would have had to inspect, to demand access, to audit. And I guess my question to you is, given all of these opportunities that the Ministry of Health had along the way under the previous performance agreement, why did the Ministry not take that opportunity to insert itself into the operations at Ornge?
Well, first of all, I will tell you this. As the Auditor General said, the full responsibility was transferred to Ornge for all the aspects that I outlined to you before, the paramedics, the air ambulance provision itself, the operation of that was all transferred to Ornge. It was their responsibility, how to provide service, how many, which type of aircraft, how to establish and evaluate medical oversight, when to dispatch ambulances, which paramedics. There's no question that was all transferred to the responsibility of Ornge.
The oversight responsibilities were never transferred to Ornge. You admitted that yourself in your previous testimony
That's right.
here. So my question is, if in fact the oversight responsibility still rested with the Ministry of Health, and the Auditor General made that very clear as well in his assessment.
I think if you read what the Auditor General, and I can ask him myself, he was not concerned with the oversight itself. He said it could be improved by more accurate information. We agree with the Auditor General.
Well, let me ask you this then. You were responsible for drafting the amended performance agreement?
The amended performance agreement?
Yes.
I was part of that process, yes.
Okay. And one of the things that the Auditor General referred to very specifically was the lack of specific service levels identified in the performance agreement. When you revised the performance agreement, did you incorporate specific service level expectations into that performance agreement?
In that performance agreement are many varied reports, and if they do not perform, then the funding can be reduced.
That's not the question, sir. And I'd like to ask you a very specific question. Did any of the initial drafts of the amended performance agreement contain defined service levels?
Not to my knowledge.
Does the final document, the amended performance agreement, contain defined service levels?
And how do you define defined service levels?
Well, I think that is a question that you shouldn't have to ask me. When we talk about defined service levels, we're talking about the very things that are a problem today at Ornge, and that is that you're not properly staffed for critical care, you're not properly staffed for advanced care service, you end up with helicopters that don't have the appropriate staffing levels. Those are the kinds of specific service levels that one would expect are clearly articulated in the performance agreement.
Well,
are they in the amended performance agreement or not?
They are not in that, and the reason why they are not in that is because there are standards under the Ambulance Act that ambulance operators are required to adhere to.
But those have always been there. And very clearly, Ornge hasn't performed up to those standards, and it's been very difficult for your ministry to hold them to those standards. Would it not have made sense, now that we're coming forward with an amended performance agreement, given the difficulties that Ornge has had, to actually incorporate that into the performance agreement so that Ornge has a full understanding, and so does everyone else, what their responsibilities are?
One of the requirements under the performance agreement is that they provide an operational plan. That operational plan, including the staffing plan that I mentioned to you previously, outlines or should outline the very things that you're talking about.
They had that same responsibility under the previous performance agreement. They failed to deliver that. They failed to live up to that, which is why one would have expected that, given their past failure, that we would incorporate those specific levels of service into the new performance agreement. It's one of the things that the Auditor General called for in his report. Why is it not there?
Well, I think that there are enough standards and enough understandings and an operational plan that would be presented to us to include those very things. And I agree with you, you need to know those very items that you're talking about, all right? Doesn't necessarily have to be in a performance agreement, as long as it's in the operational plan associated with a performance agreement.
Which gets us right back to where we started. And that is that it doesn't matter how many performance agreements you've got. It doesn't matter how much legislation you've got. If you don't have the people on the front line delivering the quality service that they're expected to, and you don't have the oversight and the accountability, we're going to be right back to where we started. Would you agree with that?
I'm not sure I agree with it, but I understand where you're going.
Well, I have to tell you, one of the frustrating things around here is that we continue to hear from previous executives who say, it wasn't my responsibility, I don't know anything about this. We have people from the ministry coming forward who, quite frankly, and I must admit, I want to thank you for your forthrightness today. And I want to thank you for bringing us documentation that we requested in a motion that the Deputy Minister failed to deliver because of the date issue. You saw beyond that. You provided us with that documentation, and I thank you for that. What I'm hoping is that on a go-forward basis, we can all work to restore confidence in our air ambulance service, but it's going to take the focus on getting it right. And so when I talk about the need for those more clearly defined levels of service in the performance agreement, the question that I have to ask on behalf of everyone is, if we know that that has been a problem in terms of the service delivery, why would we not take the extra step, put it up front, let everyone know that these are the defined service levels that we expect?
Well, can I respond to that?
Sure.
Okay. I agree with you. We are all here to do exactly what you're talking about. And thank goodness we are, okay, that we're able to do that and move forward, because it's in everybody's best interest that air ambulance service be provided properly, effectively in this province for every patient. It's the patients that we are concerned about as far as emergency health services go, okay? That's our prime motivation in life, to make sure that patients get what they need. The operational plan that is part of the performance agreement must be provided to us. It will provide exactly what you're talking about. I agree with you that you should have these types of defined service levels. I agree with you that there's problems with staffing at Ornge at this particular point in time. I agree with you that we should all work together, including Ornge and the people at Ornge, to make this a better place, to make the Ornge situation a better arrangement, to make sure that the patients are better served in this province.
I have one last question for you.
Oh, good.
Given
You have 5 minutes.
Given the experience that we now have all had, we have had a number of witnesses come forward to say that their concern was and continues to be that Ornge did not have and still does not have the core competency to be able to deliver both sides of the air ambulance service. And by both sides, I mean that the actual business of owning aircraft, maintaining aircraft, managing an aircraft business which is highly complex, is something beyond the scope of what Ornge is capable of delivering. My recollection, and you can correct me please if I'm wrong,
I will.
I don't believe that there was ever a government mandate for Ornge to get into the business of owning its own aircraft and running its own aircraft business.
100%
Would you agree with
correct.
that?
100% correct.
Okay. I ask you this. If you had the ability to now draft the next steps of Ornge, would you agree with some who have come forward to say that Ornge should be focusing on the medical side of the equation and get back to outsourcing, contracting the highly complex aircraft side of this business, because the two are far too complex for an organization like Ornge to manage overall? I'd be interested in your professional opinion on that.
Well, as I said before, I don't normally provide opinions. I provide advise, I provide, and I implement when I'm directed to do so, sort of thing. At this particular point in time, my direction is to work with Ornge to assist them to improve what they are doing as an air ambulance service provider.
Mr.
What you're
Bates, I'd
saying,
like to free you up, just for about two minutes. I'd like to free you up from the marching orders of implementation and draw on your rich experience. And I would very much like to get your opinion on this.
well, I can tell you this, that the contractors that provided the service previously, all right, in particular the rotary wing provider, all right, was an excellent provider. I don't know if that answers your question. It probably doesn't.
No, I think it does, actually.
So-
And I thank you for that, because, again, I think that if we're stuck in forcing what was, in my opinion, I'm entitled to that,
I think you are. Thank you.
if we're forcing this plan that was envisioned by Dr. Mazza, and it's faulty, and it's not going to work, we're going to continue to waste a great deal of energy, we're going to draw on a lot of people's time, and we're not building on the competency that is already up there. And I'm concerned that the mandate may be, under any circumstances, make Orange work the way it's designed, when what we should be doing is listening to say, what is it about the design that caused it to go off the rails, and what is it about the design that we have to revisit to get back to an efficient and effective air ambulance service in this province? Thank you, sir.
And thank you, Mr. Klees, and we'll move to the NDP for the remaining time.
Which is,
About 3 or 4 minutes.
all
Can I
right,
say hallelujah? Although maybe I shouldn't.
no, we'll be very brief. The suggestion that was just made by Mr. Klees, that really what was great about Orange is all of the critical care stuff that they were able to link together and get the base hospital to be linked to the land ambulance, and it worked. You know, like they did save a lot of people's lives. It seems to have really fall apart once they started to try to basically maintain their own helicopters and go into the rotary wing aviation part of it. This is where it seriously derailed. We can't change the past. I mean, Orange now owns helicopters. Orange now owns fixed-wing aircraft. Could you see a scenario where operators operate those assets for Orange, where we would go to a aviation company or companies to operate those aircraft, to operate those helicopters, while Orange retains all of the good stuff that they've done on the health side?
That is certainly a possibility.
Do you see any pluses to that possibility?
Well, I think Mr. Klees sees pluses to that. And I think that looking at it from an objective point of view, if you will, there are pluses to that.
Okay. Sorry.
I'm just going to change topics really quickly. There's a memo that regarding the for-profit entities that went out from Orange. Are you familiar with that memo? That went out, a very detailed memo?
No, I'm not. Well, I may be, but I'm not sure which one you're referring
It's the
to.
memo, you attended the briefing at the beginning of January 11th.
Oh, that one.
That's the memo that went out.
The large letter?
That's right, that's
Yeah,
right. What was your response, and what was the ministry's office, in terms of the ministry and your office and people around you, what was the response to the corporate for-profit structure?
Well, first of all, a not-for-profit, and I've done a lot of review of this, there is a an encouragement, if you will, even through Ministry of Government Services, that not-for-profit organizations establish other sources of revenue, okay?
Okay,
So
it didn't
that's,
set off any red flags for you?
that's not, no, because
Another source of revenue is not the same thing as operating a web of for-profit company. A lot of not-for-profit do generate
Oh, I
money
agree
that
with you.
comes directly back into
Totally
the
agree with
not-for-profit.
that.
And they don't have a corporate structure that looks like,
absolutely right.
Okay.
So
Absolutely
did
right.
that corporate structure then raise any red flags, the way it was designed?
Well, I mean, you'd have to be a Philadelphia lawyer to understand what it was all about.
So when it was
Or
presented-
maybe a lawyer from Whitby.
so
Well,
when
I'm
it was
not sure.
so when it was presented in that room and the corporate structure is there in front of everybody, I mean, you've been at the ministry long enough, I'm sure, to
Too
fall
long.
out your chair when you see a corporate structure like this. How come no alarm bells went out to say, wow, what the hell is this? And how can this has evolved to such a web of a corporate structure?
Well, I mean, I can tell you our point of view, and that was simply, within our mandate, and I'll say it again, is orange, all right? It's not all these other entities sort of thing. But we were concerned, if you will, use that word, or at least interested that the funding that we were providing for Orange would be utilized for Orange and not for the purposes of these other companies.
Mr. Bates, I have one final question that I want to throw in before my colleague. The Ministry of Health said, we believe the province does not control Orange, the way it was set up and whatnot. But the Ministry of Finance has said that we feel the government can effectively govern the financial and operating policies of Orange, given the fact that the ministry provides the money. Who is correct? Who do you think is correct in this? The Ministry of Health, the Minister of Health, or the Ministry of Finance?
Well, I mean, the Ministry of Finance took their own perspective on things quite rightly, okay? And that's not for me to question what the Ministry of Finance said or determined, but they determined that the funding went to Orange. Orange had very little other revenue, as I mentioned to you before, sort of thing. So this was their main source of funding, income, sort of thing. And that if the government or if the Ministry of Health wanted to change things, then they could utilize or change the legislation to do something. Whether that's something that I would agree
And
with.
I'm afraid I have to interrupt, and we are out of time, and I would like to thank you for coming in today again, and the committee is adjourned until Tuesday, June 26th at 9 a.m. Thank you very much for coming in, Mr. Bates.
This is the Ontario Parliament Television Network.